Deceptively simple, as one of my friends likes to say, but mastered by a few. I rarely see this play out in the real world, but it's a powerful framework when it's done right.
Welcome to Your Intended Message, the perfect place for leaders and promising professionals who want to convey the intended message for greater success. Every week, we interview experts who address the challenges and best practices to deliver your message effectively. That might be one-to-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many. And perhaps the most important conversation, one-to-self. I'm your host, George Torok. My guest today is Bruce Scheer. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Bruce. 1, he's been on Deloitte's fastest growing private company list 3 years in a row. That means he's doing something right. 2, he's won multiple B2B Campaign of the Year awards. And 3, he recently achieved the Amazon #1 bestseller status across 5 categories for his books. And bonus point, he hasn't figured out how to fully automate himself with Generate AI, but he's working on it. At least we got the real thing here today. Bruce Scheer, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Excellent, George. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Yeah, I haven't mastered how to automate myself. So yeah, you're getting the real deal here with all the warts and everything else, but really looking forward to our conversation today.
Delighted to be talking with you. And I've heard you say that when we're selling to potential buyers, prospects, we're getting the message, the narrative wrong. What are we doing wrong?
Oh, man. Yeah. Where do we begin? I went into one organization that was acquired by Adobe Systems, one of the 10th largest companies in the technology space. And I went in and I tell this story and I just remember it so vividly. Typically, when I start a consulting engagement, I talk to all the leaders and I try to get the company story. You know, what is their narrative? What's the story they like to tell when they're out selling? And some of the leaders are typically the best sellers in the building. You know, they have to make rain for to make sure that party continues. So I go out and I get their stories. What are they talking about? And I just scratched my head after doing 10 different interviews. I got 10 different stories, and And right after that, George, I kind of crafted a little catchphrase for what I like to do, help business leaders get their story straight. So the big problem, the big enemy that I'm trying to solve for is I call it random acts. Random acts of story. And as a result of random acts of story, random acts of conversation. And I'm sure you with your intended message, the overall mission of your podcast, when things are random, you get random results, and especially in tough environments. And if you don't have this, amazing celebrity-led, solution that everybody has to have, you can't really thrive and grow and aspire to greater heights with random acts. That's where we need to really kind of center and come together with a concerted, consistent, very clear, and I like to say catalyzing story. One that you can use when you're talking to your target buyers that's going to inspire them. And the definition of inspire, George, is to get somebody to take an action. Inspire them to act ultimately with your solution and achieve their greater heights. So anyways, I just laid out the problem domain for you, George. Any questions on that or thoughts?
A lot of questions, a lot of thoughts there, Bruce, that you triggered. And curious the use of the word random. Random acts equal random results. And I suppose if those who are experiencing random results probably should look at what they're doing to create those results. How random is their activity, is their effort, as opposed to being consistent and clear. And some people don't like consistent because that could feel boring. Have you run into that?
Oh boy. George, I've been training thousands of sellers each year for about 25 years. One thing I've witnessed is when you give sellers a consistent narrative, one that has a structure that I highlight in my book, which I must say shamelessly, best-selling book on Amazon in 5 different categories, as you'd mentioned. But when I work with them to cast that consistent narrative, they love it because they get better results. It makes life more fun. They're moving the mind of their prospects in a way that just feels good, both for the prospect and for that seller. So, it's just so powerful, so fun. And when you put that together, you're also increasing the salesperson's confidence. And as a result, you get better results. You get rid of the random and you get more consistent results. And it's fabulous. So the last thing I'm doing is giving somebody a script and turning them into a robot. That's no fun. I respect the human intelligence, the intuition of both the buyer and the seller. They need to do what they need to do, just like you and I are doing in this conversation. We're improving, playing off each other and taking it to where it needs to go. But believe you me, George, I've got a narrative in my mind that'll come out during this show. I do have a structure that I'll be using with you. And we're right into it right now. We're talking about the problem domain. That's one of the key elements of a great narrative.
It starts with the problem?
Well, no, I'll back up just a little bit, George. And I also see people get this wrong all the time. It starts with targeting the right buyer. You don't want to talk about anything until you have a really firm, keen understanding of your target organization, target industry, targeted organization, and then also who in that organization should I be talking to? And I call that the buyer, not the, the inspector, the person kicking tires and stuff like that, but who wants to make a decision that's going to change the trajectory of that organization? So I want to talk to that person, and then the narrative begins. Does that make sense?
It does. And so if it starts with targeting the organization and then the buyer, i.e. the decision maker, the only one who can say yes, stop wasting time with people who can only say no, we're approaching them based on, we understand. So do we have our problem in mind, or do we target the buyer and then define the problem?
No, we've got a problem in mind. We might need to fine tune it based on that buyer and what's important to them, what they're trying to make go away or what they're trying to achieve. But no, we've absolutely got something in mind. Just like I laid out the problem, random acts. I had that in mind before we started this dialogue. So let me give you an example, though, on just the importance of targeting. I start there because, gosh, you can waste so much time and energy on having selling conversations with organizations that don't have that burning need to buy, with buyers that potential buyers who aren't potential buyers. So you can just waste so much time. And just, George, just like immigrations where you're standing in line and wasting so much time, that kills me. I want the sellers I serve to have better selling conversations with the right buyers. It always starts there. But let me illustrate just for a minute. A buddy of mine out in Singapore called me one day, and I was telling him about some of the concepts in the book. And I decided to have a little bit of fun with him. And I said, hey, who are you targeting? And his solution was an English language platform, heavily technology enabled. I'm sure they've added AI to it now. This was just a couple of years ago. But, very sophisticated language technology platform. And so I'm going, okay, buddy, I won't say his name because I don't want him to come and kill me. But okay, friend, what's the problem you're solving for? And I go, tell me that problem in 1, 2, 3, or no more than 4 words. And George, he said, okay, our language platform, the problem we're solving is confidence. I'm like going, confidence? Tell me more. He's like going, a lot of these students who want to, learn English in China, really it's a ticket for them to aspire to greater heights, either in China, or it might be a fast track ticket to go to a great school in the United States or someplace else. where they can really leverage their English language capability, but they lack that confidence. But what our platform gives them, George, is confidence to learn that language and master it and then get on their way. Confidence. I go, oh, wow, that's really beautiful. I love it. So students are buying that platform? And he goes, no. I go, who's buying the platform? He goes, oh, these heads of English language institutions, schools in China, they want the platform. And their problem is confidence? No. It's not confidence. Well, what is their problem? Then we brainstorm for a while. Their problem's under enrollment and competitive dynamics that are just killing them. That's their problem. But not confidence. You know what I mean? So he was just miscalibrated, focusing on the student, i.e. the dog, trying to tell him, hey, that tastes good, versus the owner, of that dog that wants long life. Completely different problems that you're solving for.
So, and that's insightful. So even though these students will gain confidence, they're not the buyer. The buyer is the institution that's trying to compete in a highly competitive world.
Absolutely. Yep. So maybe if I was to use 2 words, no differentiation might be my 2-word problem statement for those English language institutions. No differentiation, and just competitors biting at the heels, all competing on price. No differentiation, though, might be the problem name that I give that problem domain. Just like I talked about random acts, that's the problem domain. Then we can talk about all the different mini problems underneath that umbrella, but random acts, that's the problem. But, and George, you were right on the right path. Once you identify the true buyer, as another consultant says, his name's Steve Martin down in California, a professor down there, he calls that buyer the bully with the juice. I typically work with B2B clients, Microsoft, Hewlett Packard, et cetera, SAP, large multinational clients. I work with scale ups and very early stage companies as well. But in some of the solutions, I normally get brought in when it's a complex solution. We really need to get that story straight. Otherwise, we're not selling anything. Customers aren't willing to embark on us. They're not inspired. We need to get that story really singing right and take that out to the sales organization and the marketing team. So that's typically the domain that I come in to help solve for. And there's normally like 6 to 8 buyers in a committee that are making a decision. Hey, should we really make this big bet on behalf of our organization? Are we really going to get the payoff on this solution? So it all starts with that narrative up front. We got to get that sitting right. But back to Steve Martin, he coined this term, the bully with the juice. Which one of those buyers is the bully with the juice? Where I really need to make sure, if it's George Torok, I need to talk to George and make sure George really gets it and is excited about it. Because if I don't, George is going to kill this sucker. And we're all going to waste a ton of time going through this long buying process and ending with no deal because George never got happy about it. So I got to figure out who's that bully with the juice as I go, talking to all those different stakeholders, what sellers like to call multi-threading. But I need to make sure, hey, who's got the real power in this paradigm? Make sure they're on board. And I want to design the problem statement and how to characterize that around that bully with the juice. That's ideal.
How do you know when you found the bully with the juice?
Well, they end up signing the contract typically, and sometimes they don't. And they'll insert themselves, and you'll have a buying process that's gone awry. But it happens through the discovery process. You're really asking, hey, who are the decision makers in this whole puzzle, and who's got ultimate decision rights? Who might be signing that contract? Who's the wizard behind the curtain, if you would? If you think about the Wizard of Oz, I want to make sure I understand that, because I want you and me, to be successful in all these conversations that we're going to have. Make sure you make the right decision. You get the results you're looking for. Who's going to be involved? Who do we need to involve to make sure that we're both successful in this buying journey? That's that type of dialogue to try to tease out, where's George Torok? And we got to make sure we get in front of George earlier versus then later.
Is that characterization of that key decision maker as a bully, is that fairly accurate? Are they the one, it's the person in the room who's giving you the hardest time?
They might, or be the biggest fan. It depends. You gotta get them on board. But they've just got power. I love the phrase "bully with the juice," but they're not always mean people. But they've got power in that whole paradigm. Everybody wants to turn and listen. Power by title or power by influence, two different things. But you just want to look at who's really going to influence that buying decision.
So we figure out the problem we're solving. We find our target organization. We identify
other way around. Find the target organization, target buyer. Then we move on to the problem, as you just mentioned.
Okay, their specific problem.
Yeah.
And then is that when we provide a narrative?
Well, no, the problem is part of the narrative. So, again, we got to get this thing lined up right. Then we move into what's the problem we're trying to help that person solve for. And then once we've got agreement there, what is it? Very often when you do this right, it's a problem that the buyer might not even known that they had. It's a blind spot. Or maybe they've had it for years and then they've just become accustomed to it. You say, what do you do? Hey, we hire people and they leave. What do you do? That's just the way the world works. And then you're really trying to come in and highlight a flaw in how they think or a flaw in how they approach the whole thing. But anyways, you're trying to, I call it spotlight the problem, because you're really trying to help them see their situation in a way they never saw it before. I'm showing you all the viewing audience. I'm showing on screen right now a spotlight on this big, hairy problem. And that's what you're trying to do. You're really trying to, truly spotlight that so they can see that problem. And just like a great spotlight, it kind of cuts out all the noise and it puts all that brightness right on what you're shining it upon. So what's that problem? And then for the viewing audience, they can see kind of my wife's beautiful illustration, but it's a big hairy ball. It's like a big rubber band ball for people listening. And you want to make that problem big and hairy. And I learned that from one of my clients. What's that big hairy problem? And very often when I'm testing narratives with my, the target buyers of my clients, I'm going to ask them, hey, how do I make this problem even uglier and hairier than it is already? And they'll go, oh, you forgot this. And then we make it just, look bad in a way that they've never concertedly looked at it that way before. And that's really keen insight that a great narrative brings into this selling conversation. What is that problem and how can we look at that in a unique way? George, once we've done that, or any question, George, before I move on? I'll take you through the narrative structure.
Please move on. I want to follow you through here.
Absolutely. So we plant that problem, we spotlight it, we get agreement there. And I often say, if you don't have agreement there, don't move forward. You're wasting everybody's time because they don't have a problem to solve. And solving a problem is the biggest motivator in the whole puzzle. They have to agree with you that there is a problem to solve for. Otherwise, solutions exist to solve problems. But if there's no problem, forget the solution stuff. You're wasting time. So you really got to get concerted agreement there and kind of work with that prospect to characterize it. What's the cost of that? Both the personal cost to them in their careers and what's going on. How's that really costing them and holding them back and what they want to achieve? What's the financial cost behind that problem? Because it is that way, how much money are you leaving on the table? Is it $1 million per month? A couple $100,000 per month? What is it? So we want to quantify that a little bit too, especially if they're a business leader who think in money. We need to get the money side of that there. And then also perhaps strategically the time. What's that problem domain costing you and helping your organization propel ahead and helping you keep your job, because you're responsible for doing that. So we really need to dig in there. So once we have agreement there, then we move on to, what I call the desired outcome. And we help that buyer envision that. And for the viewing audience, there's a couple of words there, and George, I probably made you laugh. Fun and happy wife. There's a story behind that. But help that buyer envision the outcome, and then from there, George, if they can see what good looks like when that problem goes away or is minimized, and then what comes instead, that outcome that they can get excited about. If you got agreement there on what that, what the unicorns and rainbows look like, what's life on the beach look like, then and only then can we talk about the solution domain. Well, how do we get there? How do we move forward together? Yeah, I want that problem to go away, Bruce. I want to achieve that outcome, Bruce. What do we do next? That's when we can start easing into talking about the solution, but not features and functions and benefits, George. Not what all sellers are trained upon and what all product marketers, sweat the late nights on. How do we, make our stuff shine? We're not talking about stuff yet. We're talking about the solution domain. And, for the viewing audience, you're looking at the solution domain, George. I don't think this made you laugh, but it's boating. Boating's, the solution for all life's woes. And then from there, once we've got agreement on the solution, hey, that makes sense, Bruce. Then we talk about some next steps. What are we going to do to kind of bring that solution into that prospect's world and make that problem go away and achieve that outcome that they want? How do we move forward together? That's what we call next steps. And George, if you want, I could put this into a fun little personal story just to make sure these concepts are really anchored. One of the things I learned, gosh, I think I thought about this 25 years ago. If I can't take some of my big highfalutin concepts and break it down to how it impacts me personally in my life, then it probably doesn't work. It breaks. That theory, that framework, it wasn't real. It was made up. So I often like to bring things down to a personal level. But any questions, George, before we go there?
No, I'm eager to hear your narrative.
Okay, thank you, man. So, this happened early in the pandemic. This was probably about April, May of 2020. My brother called me up one day, and this is my oldest brother, one that I hate to admit it, but I think he's a lot smarter than me. He's a retired doctor. And he calls me up and he goes, hey, guess what? And I go, what? And it was unusual for him to be calling me. I normally call him. And he's like going, well, Dad wants to sell his boat. And I'm like going, in the back of my mind, I'm going, oh, shit, where's this going? And George, just for a little bit of context, my dad, at the time was 92. He's now 94. And my dad is crazy smart. But when it comes to computer literacy, he struggles a little bit. He wonders where the server is. And I'm like going, it's in the cloud. And what's that? And, we get really confused together. But if I need him to break down a football game for me, he's on it. He should be coaching, not Pete Carroll of the Seahawks, but my dad. He's really good. So anyways, my brother says, hey, Dad wants to sell his boat and he wants to sell it on Craigslist. And I'm like going, oh, double shit. That's going to require so much energy. And I go to my brother, I go, well, it looks like I'm selling it. And he goes, yeah, I was kind of hoping you might be willing to do that. And I'm like going, oh, great. Dad's 400 miles away from me, wants to sell it on Craigslist. I'm going to have a mail stuff to, nightmare. And then my brother goes, but I thought you might want to buy it. And I'm like going, what? He's like going, yeah, you might want to buy it. And I go, why in the heck would I want to buy Dad's old, smelly, rotten fishing boat? Is it electric like my Tesla? Does it have a 49-inch ultra wide monitor, that I can play with? Is it in the metaverse? Why would I want this nasty, spewing fishing boat? And he goes, well, how long have you been living on that island? And for everybody here, I live on Vashon Island. It's right across from the Seattle airport. But I go, well, I've been living here 16 years. And he goes, wow, 16 years living on an island. If I was you, I would just feel trapped. I'm going, trapped? What do you mean trapped? He goes, yeah, trapped. He goes, what if something happens where, you know that earthquake that's supposed to hit the Northwest sometime? Anything left of I-5, and Bruce, you're left of I-5? Anything left of I-5 is kind of going to get wiped out. Man, if I was you, I'd want to have a boat. Who knows when it's going to hit? 50 years, 500 years, nobody knows. But, you're dependent on that ferry system. I don't know. I'd want to have that boat if I was you. What if that ferry system kind of breaks down on another day and you need to get someplace? Man, if I was you, I'd probably want to have a boat. I don't know, Bruce. If I was you, I'd just feel trapped. I'm like going, well, I don't feel trapped. I'll call you tomorrow and I'll get more details. I'll sell that boat. So luckily that call came on a weekend. And so that night I tossed and turned in my bed and couldn't sleep and woke him up in the morning and go, hey, guess what? I'm feeling trapped. Why else should I buy that boat? And he's like going, well, man, you're living in the Puget Sound there. I don't know if you knew this, but about every mile there's a marina in the Puget Sound where you live. And your wife loves to eat out. But there you are, trapped at home in the pandemic. No places are open, but all those marinas are going to be open for sure. You could call ahead and order takeout, and you would literally delight your wife. And in my mind, and I'm showing the viewing audience right now, I'm thinking, wow, fun, my fun, but then also happy wife. And George, you can see there are 4 words, fun and happy wife. And I'm like, that sounds totally cool. Wow. And I'm like going, then I'm like going, hey, Dad's boat, would it get me to all those cool marinas where I could order food for takeout? He goes, well, it's got 14 inches of draft. Yeah, it'll get out and about. I mean, if the weather kicks up and there's big waves and stuff, you just got to slow way down. But as long as you slow down, that boat, you can pretty much go anywhere. I'm like going, far out. Wow, that sounds fun. Well, Steve, my brother, I go, where do I store this thing? And then he's like going, well, you still got that little parking area up at the top of your property? And I go, yeah, it's sitting there. Anything in it? And I go, no, it's empty. He goes, stick it there. No problem. You put a cover on it. And I go, well, how do I get it home? He goes, well, you still have that old Lexus? And I go, yeah, I got it. He goes, does it have a tow hitch on it by any chance? I go, yeah, it does actually, for my mountain bike. He goes, oh, cool. What tow, how big is it? And I go, it's 2 inch. He goes, perfect. Dad's boat's 2 inches. And I go, far out. And he goes, yeah, all you have to do is just buy a ball for it and just stick it in. Any auto store has it. Well, then how do I maintain it? And he goes, oh, it's simple. Just put good gas in it primarily, Bruce. And then every now and then change the oil. But I just tuned it up. It's running like a top. I go, fuck, this is awesome. And I went and bought it that weekend, drove all the hell the way out there, brought it back. And then during the pandemic, the joke was I'd ask the family, hey, anybody want a bubble tea? And they'd go, yeah, Dad, I'd like one. Anybody want to go? Yeah, sure. And me and the big kids, we would go jump in the boat and spend about an hour and a half going to get a bubble tea over in a place called Tacoma, Washington, and then come all the hell the way back in the rain or shine, didn't matter. And then come home and have bubble teas and just giggle the whole way. And I'm still boating today. I'm on boat number 2. But anyways, just to recap on this whole thing, my brother, he sold me a boat that I didn't know I needed or wanted. And I detested boats prior to that, thinking, hey, they're polluting the world and they're horrible. But, the first thing my brother did, he's not dumb. He targeted the right buyer, somebody that had money to buy that thing, but had a place to store it, could maintain it. He knew more than I did, but he targeted the right buyer. And then from there, he helped spotlight that problem, that big, hairy problem I had, being stuck on an island, especially when an earthquake came. And I'm in the pandemic. I'm already afraid and scared. I don't want to die. And I want to protect my family. I need that boat. That's enough of a reason. That's a big problem that I needed to solve for. And he nailed that problem, named that problem in one word, trapped. And then from there, once we had agreement there, then he moved forward. And remember, this is the next day where he started helping me paint a picture about this desired outcome that I was looking for. He helped me envision that, talking about the fun I'd have, some adventure, cruising around on a boat, and then a happy wife. Very important, George. We've been married 32 years and I don't want to break that track record. So her happiness is a key feature in my happy life. Then he took me to the solution, and he didn't sell me on a bunch of features, functions, and benefits. And I normally see that mistake all the time. I didn't care. All I cared about was not being trapped and having some fun and adventure with my wife and a happy wife. So he sold me on the concept of boating effectively. And then all he did is just let me know that, hey, what he had to offer, my dad's boat, fit within there and was going to help me. And then he just laid out these clear next steps. Of course, I'm on my second boat now, and I've been very close to getting the third. But he got me underway. He exposed that unconsidered need that I had in a way that, he really planted that big problem and just took me all the way through and helped me with that buyer journey, that set of next steps. So that's really, the heart of what he did and what I teach in that particular book here, that's done really well on Amazon. It's been really fun. George, the book, it's only a couple hours worth of a read. It's got the beautiful illustrations in there. And I've got a narrated version. If people love this voice, there's a narrated version too.
And the book for listeners is Inspire Your Buyers. Go to market with a story that sizzles, just like selling Dad's boat.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can find the link to that book in the description below. Bruce, who will get the most from that book?
Well, I really designed it for folks that want to work on their story. And if they don't have the big bucks and want to hire me and my team, I really designed it in the way, because constantly I'll get questions from alumni or startup founders, et cetera. And then when they hear my price tag, they kind of freak out and go, whoa, I've already kind of drained my kids' college fund and I can't afford that. No way. And now I've got a yes. I don't have to say no, I've got a yes. And this book is that yes. So somebody that, really wants to thrive and accelerate their revenue growth, I've used this model for galactic enterprise clients. And then, like Microsoft and Hewlett Packard and Adobe that I mentioned as part of this podcast. And then I've also used it for scale ups, a company called Tableau or Concur here in the Northwest in the travel and expense domain, helping them get acquired by big behemoth companies with a great story that sizzles, all the way down to startups. So it works across the board, and it even works for not-for-profits. I do pro bono work, George, and I worked with an outfit that trains about 10,000 kids a year, and I helped them get their story straight so they could scale that and impact a lot of different families and kids associated with that program. So it's just fundamental. I brought it down to how my retired doctor brother sold me a boat. I mean, it's just that simple. Deceptively simple, as one of my friends likes to say, but mastered by a few. I rarely see this play out in the real world, but it's a powerful framework when it's done right.
Good advice there. Bruce, as we prepare to wrap up, if you could sit down with a business leader and give them 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice to get their team conveying the same narrative. What might be that 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice? And perhaps it's something you've said already.
No, it's not, I didn't say it, but there's 3 traps that I typically see business leaders fall into. First and foremost, if you do have those random acts, just recognize that. But the traps I see people falling into is, well, I hire good people. They should just be better than that. And if they aren't, it's up or out. And that's just the wrong mentality. That's not taking personal responsibility for the situation. And I see that all the way at senior levels. And that's just a perspective of inexperience, but I see it all the time. The second big trap I see people falling into is, hey, we'll get one of our junior marketing people and get them to, work on a story that's going to be good. And they might, but they don't have the credibility. They don't have the sponsorship. They don't have the power to bring everybody into alignment. And so, very often that fails. It fizzles and fails. And very often it doesn't hit the mark. That junior marketing person doesn't understand the buying context and really how to design that narrative. They don't have that customer insight that you need to do it right. And then the third trap that I see is, hey, we need a singing narrative. I know somebody in the advertising industry. Let's bring in an agency and craft our narrative that way. But from what I've witnessed in my experience, agencies do great work. We both know that. But they might do more on the brand side They might come up with a great slogan or catchphrase. Of course, the visual identity piece, that's where they make great money. And they'll come up with a messaging map. But very often they don't translate that into a narrative that sizzles, into that story that I can use in my selling conversations. And so somebody's got to do that. So I wouldn't fall into those three key traps, because you'll just, time will go by and you won't get the results you're looking for, and that problem would persist. So I recommend grabbing a copy of this book and see if you buy into that. And then if you need any help, of course, my team's around. There's other people in the industry that do that, but not too many that I've seen.
Powerful advice. My guest today is Bruce Scheer, reminding you to inspire your buyers. If you like what you heard, tell your friends and post your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, because that helps more listeners find us. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.